Hello, and welcome to the CDO Magazine interview series. I am Michael Fillios, founder and CEO of IT Ally and a CDO editorial board member. And we are partnering with CDO Magazine, MIT CDO IQ, and the International Society of Chief Data Officers in a series of interviews. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Jen Bachner, Director of Data Analytics and Policy from Johns Hopkins University. Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So Jen, you've got a pretty impressive background in academics and publishing and governmental affairs. It's kind of a unique combination of skills and experiences. However, at the center of all of this is data and analytics, obviously. So that's why we're talking to you today. And the audience is wondering sort of what can you tell us what motivated you to pursue a career in the field of data and analytics?
Well, thanks. And thanks again for having me. I originally pursued my PhD in political science because I wanted to study public opinion and political behavior. I've always been fascinated by how people learn about politics, how they develop their political identities, and how they participate in the political system. When I was in graduate school, I realized that we can learn about phenomena like political behavior using analytics. And this is because analytics allow us to quantify relationships of interest. For example, we can use survey data to measure the relationship between civic education and political participation. Or we can use experimental data to quantify the causal relationship between, say, campaign outreach and voting. When you have a thoughtful research design and a careful analysis, we can use analytics to answer all sorts of interesting questions. In the governance space, I think one of the most important uses of analytics is evidence-based policymaking. And over the last few years, we've seen government agencies invest a substantial amount of resources in developing their analytic capacities, which has led to, I think, improved government services and programs in a variety of areas. And going forward, I think that analytics will be put to great use evaluating government programs and policies. And I'm optimistic that this will allow us to invest further in what works well and to move away from what doesn't.
That makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious, is this a new role at Johns Hopkins, or how did this role evolve?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I joined Johns Hopkins as part of the MA in Government program, and we started offering some courses in quantitative methods, analytics, statistics, because folks who work in government were realizing that this set of skills would help them advance their careers and it'd help advance the missions of the agencies that they were working at if they were in the public sector, or help them with their policy work if they were in the private sector. And in 2014, we realized that there was such a demand for people who have the skill set that we built out a full curriculum and launched a full master's program in this area.
And that was in 2014.
Let's see here. Yes, that was in 2014 that we launched. At the time, it was called a Master of Science in Government Analytics. And a couple of years ago, we tweaked the name to be Data Analytics and Policy to reflect the fact that the program is valuable to folks who work in both the public and private sector. And the skills are quite transferable. If you're using analytics in the public sector, those skills are just as relevant in the private sector when you're analyzing policies, evaluating programs, and the like.
Understood. So along those lines, I know you have a lot of experience educating, professionals, as you said, and preparing them for leadership roles involving data literacy and the use of data to accomplish these objectives in business and government. What are some of the skills you consider most important in developing these leaders?
I really appreciate this question because I think that many people think that being a good leader in analytics simply means knowing how to perform a good statistical analysis. And while this is certainly an important skill, an incredibly important skill, and it's not easy to do, there are two additional skill sets that I consider essential to being a good analyst. And those are creativity and excellent communication. And when I say creative, I mean that a good leader should be able to think about how to leverage aspects of a phenomenon in order to use statistical methods as effectively as possible. There are some scenarios, for example, that lend themselves to conducting a natural experiment, while others might be good candidates for, say, a regression discontinuity design. So in particular, a good leader in analytics is able to think creatively about how to use statistical methods to learn as much as possible about whatever phenomenon is of interest. And beyond conducting a good analysis, a leader must be able to communicate the findings effectively, and particularly when they're talking to key decision makers. At Johns Hopkins, we are increasingly focused on teaching our students to be data storytellers, meaning that they should be able to craft a compelling narrative, complete with easy to read visualizations that make an argument using statistical findings. A leader should be able to explain the real world meaning of a set of findings to either a technical or lay audience, and they should also be able to describe the limitations of an analysis. In other words, a good leader should be able to communicate what the data tell us, the level of confidence that we should have in those findings, and what questions remain unanswered.
I really like that. And, the storyteller concept, I think, is applicable for just about anyone that's in a technical role. Being a former chief information officer and talking to business leaders or others that are outside of the field, I think these are great skills to hone and to have in your toolkit. So I appreciate that as well. I recently hosted a panel focused on ethical use of data and data for good. Thinking of that, I know you authored a report on predictive policing, preventing crime and data, and preventing crime with data and analytics, pardon me. And that seems to be a perfect example of delivering value through the analysis of data and data for good. I'm wondering if you can share more about that work with the rest of the audience.
Thank you. And I agree that what several law enforcement agencies around the country are doing with respect to analytics provide excellent examples of how to use analytics to find solutions to real problems. This particular report that I wrote examines 3 key ways that police are using analytics. First, they are using algorithms to identify high-risk areas by looking at everything from the availability of escape routes where potential victims might gather, such as tourist venues. Santa Cruz, for example, has partnered with academic researchers to develop software that identifies pretty small areas, often about 500 square feet, that are likely to experience crime. And this allows law enforcement to deploy their resources as efficiently as possible in order to create a deterrent effect. Second, police are using time and space analyses to forecast crime sequences. In Baltimore County, for example, police are using directional mapping to, in one instance, identify the next likely grocery store robbery that was likely to occur after a series of similar robberies took place. They then surveilled the identified store and were able to apprehend the robber in that case. And third, police are constructing social network maps to pinpoint persons of interest and to track information flows between them. In Richmond, the police department there used this technique to cut off a particular suspect's resources. With no help remaining, the suspect in this case ultimately turned himself into the police. And there was another case in Richmond where the police used a similar approach to map a homicide suspect's network of family and friends. The police then passed information through the network that the individual was wanted by police. And again, the suspect turned himself into police, this time within hours. So as you can see, there are a variety of effective ways to use analytics in law enforcement. But I want to touch upon, something that you mentioned in your question, which is that, all the officers and leaders I spoke with while writing the report agreed that analytics should complement rather than replace sort of non-quantitative approaches. And in this case, community policing. The data-driven approaches are not a substitute for the relationships and trust that officers must build with citizens to create safe communities. And further, law enforcement agencies, as you alluded to, need to address privacy and security concerns as they develop and manage their data analytics capabilities. When analytics are used in appropriate ways, they present real opportunities to reduce crime and to lower crime fighting costs, but there is certainly a risk of misuse, just as there is when using analytics in any context.
Yeah, it really is remarkable. And there's a limitless opportunities here to leverage this kind of capability and doing it for good and smartly and securely and acknowledging all these other side benefits that come along with it. But still recognizing this is an emerging field. I mean, you talked about 2014, and certainly we've seen more universities and other organizations embrace the same things that Johns Hopkins has in terms of, making this a more formal field and available in educational institutions and whatnot. So there's got to be some good leaders out there that are pioneering this space and use of data. I'm wondering if you can share some perspectives on who some of those might be from your point of view, and maybe some of the challenges that they have faced as this, a field is evolving.
Absolutely. In my work, I'm fortunate to have met many leaders in this field, particularly in government, who are doing amazing work to advance analytics. And as you said, to really craft the field and build out this field of analytics. And in my case in particular, sort of analytics focused on policy and governance. These people include CDOs, CIOs, and other agency leaders who have launched analytics group and have cut through a lot of red tape to get the resources and staff that they've needed to start doing great work. One of the biggest catalysts of change in the area has been the passage of the Foundations of Evidence-Based Policymaking Act of 2018. And this act requires that all government agencies develop statistical evidence to inform policymaking and to increase public access to government data. The passage of this legislation prompted all agencies to modernize their data and analytics capabilities and to improve data sharing across agencies and with the public. One of the biggest challenges that analytics leaders have faced is securing buy-in from both organization leaders as well as other employees who are skeptical about an over-reliance on data. In speaking with folks in the field, they've told me that to address this challenge, analysts should work to build trust by acknowledging that data is not going to solve every problem and that it's one of several important factors that should inform big decisions. In other words, I think it's important that analysts convey that evidence-based decision-making is not a complete paradigm shift from existing processes that guide decision-making, but it's complementary to other decision-making inputs. Another significant challenge that leaders in analytics face is resource investment. And there are several things that analytics professionals can do to address this challenge. First, they can demonstrate good stewardship with the resources that they are given. When leaders prove that they can make good use of what they have, such as by demonstrating the value add of analytics and learning from any missteps, they're then likely to be entrusted with additional investments. Second, leaders should be specific and goal-oriented in their requests for more resources. If they are asking for more technology or more staff, analytics leaders should be very clear about what tasks need to be completed to achieve which objectives of the organization and the time needed to complete these tasks. This specificity helps organization leaders understand how additional investments will contribute to the overall goals of the entity. And third, many analytics leaders have expressed to me that finding and retaining qualified staff is a major challenge. There's still more demand than there is supply of well-trained analysts who can both perform a rigorous analysis, but also communicate the findings in a clear and compelling manner. And this, of course, is something that the JHU Data Analytics and Policy Program is trying to address.
So Jen, I want to thank you on behalf of CDO Magazine for joining us today. I've certainly learned a lot and appreciate your time and insights on this particular topic. And for others that want to learn more about CDO Magazine or to view more interviews, please visit cdomagazine.tech. Thanks again and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.